Welcome to RPG Heroes, a podcast where every other week I speak to a true hero in the realm of role-playing games about their journey, their craft, and their views. As your host, I will focus on one particular aspect of this wonderful hobby for the interview, regale you with stories from my own 25 years of experience with role-playing games, and reflect on the major takeaways from the interview. Join me now on this epic journey and awaken the hero in you. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about maps. Maps in-game, maps out-of-game, etc. And helping me with this is RPG hero Nate Vanderzee, known from the WASD20 YouTube channel and sellswordmaps.com. But before we dive into all that, a couple of announcements. One, I've joined Twitter, would you believe it or not? I have a Facebook page and I have an Instagram page, but I found that Instagram wasn't really doing what I was hoping it would do for the channel, and I might be too old for Instagram or something. I just don't get it. However, Twitter seems to resonate with me a lot more. So try and follow me on Twitter at RPG Heroes 1. For some reason, RPG Heroes was already taken by some dastardly person. So yeah, make sure you follow me and let's get the conversation going over there. The other bit of news is I've done a complete overhaul of my Patreon page at patreon.com/rpgheroes. I realized that the tiers that I had originally were priced rather steeply for what you're getting, and well, I thought let's reevaluate, and so I did. So now we have 3 regular levels, which is the Heroic Patron at $1 a month, where I will thank you in an upcoming episode. And you will see, of course, my Patreon posts about upcoming episodes, etc. I really appreciate any kind of support at that level. And, well, it just so happens we have a new supporter to thank in this level. And his name is Lord Mordy, which I think is just an excellent name. And it's also really cool that you're supporting me. So thank you, Lord Mordy. We at the $3 level, we have the Paragon patrons, which on top of the other benefits get early access information to about the upcoming interviews, and they get to suggest questions. Also, they get to join the Discord. Yay, that's fun. And then we have the Epic patrons at $5 a month, who on top of all the other things get monthly in-depth information about my RPG campaigns that I run for my friends. They get access to the voice channel on the Discord, and they will receive a handwritten thank you card. And, speaking of this card, it's on the way, Bert, so keep an eye on your mailbox. All right, well, that's all the news I have for you, so let's dive into maps. So, before I talk to Nate, let's just discuss what I know or think about maps. So I figure there's a few different ways that you can approach maps. One is no maps at all in an RPG, which is known often as theater of the mind. Then there are referential maps, which don't have any measurements and don't have much tactical value. Then there are tactical maps, and then there's something called the hex crawl, which is something I came across while researching the topic. Let's begin with theater of the mind. Now, all kinds of role-playing games can use theater of the mind. And the idea is you simply describe the situation as accurately as you can. The players put it in their minds where they are and what is going on. They can ask questions, of course, and they react accordingly. So I could say, for instance, there is an orc at the door. He's about 20 feet away from you. What do you want to do? Players might ask, well, what's in the way? What's in the room? I say, well, there's a table and a bunch of chairs, and in the corner there's a fireplace, which still has some glowing embers. And this allows the players to then think, okay, well, I could use this table, I could jump over it, use it for cover, there's these kind of things. Maybe I could scoop some embers out of the fireplace and throw them at the orc to distract him or hurt him, etc., etc. So the theater of the mind approach has the advantage that you don't need anything. You don't need graph paper or a nice battle mat. You don't need miniatures. You don't need all kinds of markers, etc. You don't need anything. I think as a game master, you still need to prepare. You need to think about the situations you want to create, but you can do it on a much smaller scale and much more simply. And you can also use whatever comes to mind without having to alter your map. So those are some advantages. I think also for players, it allows players to have a bit more input, so they can ask questions such as, is there also a window in this room with this orc? Which can prompt the game master to think, actually, that's a good question. Yes, there is a window. Okay, great. Or, no, there are no windows in this dark room. And both are interesting options. But this means the player just had a little bit of input into the reality, the shared reality that you're playing in. Of course, Theatre of the Mind also has some drawbacks. One, in my experience, is that when things are not entirely clear, such as the distance which you need to traverse to get to an enemy, the amount of things that are in the way, or the amount of enemies that are even there, or who is where and why, etc., then it can become a little bit annoying during combat to try and figure all these things out. It slows things down, whereas a mini on the map 20 feet from the enemy is very, very clear. All right, and then there's, of course, how to do it. Well, I think for Theatre of the Mind, what you need to do is be very descriptive. And I think this is an excellent skill to have as a game master and also as a player, to be very involved in where you are. And that's, again, I didn't mention it during the advantages part, but I think it's also an advantage of Theatre of the Mind. You have to be super engaged as a player to be able to do this, which can sometimes help with the immersion. So, lots of descriptive text is what's needed. You need to have a pretty good feeling for distance and space, and you need to be flexible, I think, as a game master and also as a player. If you think the room is this and this size, or if you think the table is a certain amount of feet high, you might be disappointed when you hear, no, actually it's this big or it's this high or there is no table at all. So you need to deal with changing situations. With a good game master, I think Theatre of the Mind can be excellent, very engaging, and it helps with your imagination. Then there are referential maps. These are the kind of maps that I can just stare at for a while to get inspiration. And a referential map could, for instance, be a map of the world, a map of the continent, a map of a country, the map of a province, etc., or the map of a city, a place, a town. And I love looking at these maps and what's there and why are there some standing stones to the north? What could they be? And quite often, actually, when I want to design some sort of scenario or adventure, I look at a map that inspires me and I can work from that. So my current game, for instance, I'm running Dungeons and Dragons for some friends, and in my current game, they decided to go to the old ruins of a dwarven city underneath the mountain. And I thought, okay, I need some kind of really cool underground dwarven city, underdark type place. And, well, I didn't have a lot of time to draw a really cool map, so I thought, well, let's find one online, and I found one indeed. It's a huge map, and I thought, wow, that's perfect. It gives me time to, or it gives the players time to kind of rummage around and look for things, and I would give them some hints as to what might be where. And the map itself then inspired me to come up with the encounters, which is really, really cool. And referential maps have the disadvantage that they don't show any measurements. They can't really be used in a tactical or combat type situation. But the advantage of that is because it's not precise, you can say, you can come up with things like, oh, well, it's going to take you 3 days to get there, or it's just 3 hours, whatever you want it to be. So it gives you a little bit of flexibility, less than Theatre of the Mind, but more than a tactical map. And how to create these maps, well, I'm not a specialist at that at all. I drew quite a few maps for my different games, but I wouldn't really call them wonderful. But luckily, we have an RPG hero on the show pretty soon, and we're going to talk to him about all that. And then there are tactical maps. So quite a lot of role-playing games involve combat, and when combat occurs, a lot of games refer to some sort of tactical system. And of course, the best-known role-playing game out there would be Dungeons and Dragons, and since I think the 3rd edition, it has been employing gridded battle maps where every square represents 5 feet. And this makes your maps super precise. And it also gives you a very clear indication how far can I go in a combat round, etc. What are the exact dimensions of a room? What is my range for my bow? Can I hit this guy? Can I see this and this far in the dark? Etc. And by creating these 5-foot squares, well, it just makes things easier, I guess, to get a good bearing on where am I and where are my enemies. The advantage of tactical maps is that you can, if you like such things as a player, be very tactical and think in a very tactical sense. 4th edition Dungeons and Dragons leaned into that kind of time mode of play very heavily. So if you enjoy tactical play, maybe you also enjoy war games, for instance, this can be a lot of fun. Also, if you like miniatures and those kind of things, you get to use them, which is all great. And the great thing about tactical maps as a dungeon master or as a game master is you can prepare them meticulously and have all kinds of clever things in there that kind of support the game mechanics that the players will be using, which is great. Of course, it also has its own drawbacks. I find using tactical maps, it makes things easier for me, but it also makes things more difficult because everything is kind of set in stone. And I have to be very precise with my preparations. And, well, it is quite a lot of work. And it can sometimes make combat feel like some sort of complicated war game or board game. And if you concentrate too much on the tactical and too much on the 5-foot steps and all this kind of stuff, it can detract from the role play. It doesn't have to, obviously, but it can happen. Index Card RPG, or ICRPG, from my first guest from episode 1, hint, if you haven't listened to that, you should, uses a system that is a bit simpler. It simply says, well, either you're toe-to-toe, or you're kind of close, or you're very far away. So rather than counting 5-foot squares, you basically get a feeling for, am I close, am I far, or am I really like on top of the guy? And that's another way to look at it. It helps, I think, to speed the game up a little bit. So for tactical maps, what I tend to use for games that actually take place around the table is a wet erase battle mat with the squares already drawn in for me. And I just have some markers, and I draw out what I had prepared. That's great, it works really well, and I tend to use either miniatures, but I don't have that many, or what I tend to do is something that I learned from ICRPG, which is I print out little standees, and I have these plastic feet that you can buy for next to nothing on Amazon or eBay, and I put them in, which means that I can have an almost endless supply of all kinds of representative minis without spending too much money on them and not having to paint them, etc. Also makes it very portable. So that's a great way to kind of get started with that if you don't want to spend a lot of money on miniatures. So that's one way to do it. Another thing that I have here in my house, because I'm a teacher, is a flip chart. And I have a flip chart that happens to have a grid of 1-inch squares, which is perfect, and huge pieces of paper. And that gives me a way to draw something at home at my leisure and just whack it on the table, rather than having to draw it out on the wet erase map. Okay, so that's another thing you can do. And of course, these tactical maps also work really well in online RPG solutions such as Roll20. And I think whatever you do and whatever system you play, I don't know how far each system goes in this tactical battle part, but I would definitely discuss it with the group that I'm playing with. Like, how tactical do you want to go? How important do you find these specific details? Oh, I want to take a 2-foot step here, and can I climb up 1 inch, etc.? Or do you prefer to go in kind of broad strokes? And that might determine actually which game system you choose to play, and it can also determine what sort of maps you use when you're in combat. All right, so and then there's the last thing that I mentioned, which is an hex crawl. I hadn't really heard of it before, but when I was researching the topic of maps, I came across it and I thought, wow, that's very interesting. So it's a way actually to create and run your own role-playing game campaign. And well, I think it's a huge topic that I would like to discuss in its own episode. So let's look forward to that one and keep it in the fridge for now. Time to talk to Nate about maps. So here we have Nate Vanderzee, better known as Nate from the WASD20 YouTube channel, where he educates his viewers on all manner of RPGs, DM advice, and most importantly, maps, which happens to be today's topic. He also runs sellswordmaps.com, where you can commission him to create maps for your games. So a warm welcome to the show, Nate.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and we just found out we have some kind of connection because we both have Vander in our last name.
That's right.
Yeah,
the Dutch connection.
That's it. Yeah, wonderful. And so I read that you discovered role-playing games at the age of 32. And I'm always curious when I talk to people about this topic, how that came about. So what about you? How did you get in touch with role-playing?
Yeah, so for me, it goes back a few years now. So now I'm 38. And so it is, in the big picture, a fairly recent discovery. It still feels that way for me in terms of my lifespan. But I feel like I grew up around a lot of things that were D&D like, for sure. A friend and I were just really into fantasy and really into computer games. And growing up, and we would walk up to the old used bookstore and buy D&D novels and other fantasy novels.
Right.
And yeah, I remember when Diablo, when we got Warcraft 2, back in Warcraft 2 Orcs and Humans, the strategy game. Yeah. I remember it came with a trailer for Diablo on the disc, like a teaser. Yeah. And we watched that thing over and over and over. And we were like so into this concept of this game Diablo that we made characters for Diablo. Like before the game ever came out and we knew anything about the mechanics, we were naming our characters and giving them gear and loot. It was like a character sheet. And but never and my friend had Hero Quest.
Right. Yeah.
The board game. Anyway, good so gateway. I grew up we would go to the Wizards of the Coast store and buy miniatures. Yeah. But we didn't know what D&D was really. Other than I knew that it was maybe kind of evil. It was the 80s after all.
Yeah, the whole satanic panic thing.
Yeah. So anyway, I finally took the plunge when I read a couple books. One was Masters of Doom, which is about the guys from id Software who made like Doom and Wolfenstein and Commander Keen, and read about their D&D games that they would have, and it was just it was fascinating to me. It was like, wow, what is this thing? Because they would just have these marathon sessions, and they're all kind of wild, crazy guys, game designers who just lived on pizza and soda and just so anyway, and then also Ready Player One, where there's kind of like mentioned, I really enjoyed that book. There was a lot of things that connected with me, and I also was inspired to try to connect with more things from that book. Like D&D.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. And so in the 8 short years since then, well, 7.5, 8 years, your contribution to the realm of RPGs has really impressed me, I have to say, for such a short time. So what did you think when I invited you on my podcast to be an RPG hero?
Well, thank you, first of all. And I think, it's something that it's been a slow build for me. That's, realizing it doesn't take much, I guess, to get people on the internet to like look to you as an authority. And I've tried to be realistic about the voice that I have, and what my strengths and weaknesses are. I'll be very upfront with people that I've only been doing this for 5 or 6 years, and I don't, I don't feel like I still feel like I have a lot of room to grow as a dungeon master, for example. When it comes to maps, I love drawing maps, and I'm glad people look up to me, but I'm very upfront about the fact that when it comes to like total geographical accuracy and thinking about
Yeah.
plate tectonics and all this stuff, like it's not really my strength.
Huh.
So, I try to be realistic about it, but I'm happy if people can learn and enjoy from from what I do.
Yeah. All right. Wonderful. Yeah, and I think that's kind of what drew me to your channel. Is that some people, they will, like you say, they will kind of act like the major authority on a certain topic, and yeah, that can be a bit off-putting. But in your case, you're very humble and very positive about what you do, and I think it's encouraging to new people who just arrived at the scene. Let's say that within a relatively short amount of time, you can learn a lot and get really good at things like creating maps or running a game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, a lot of the focus lately on your channel has been on maps and creating them. And yeah, that's the main topic of my podcast episode right now.
Hmm.
And so I was wondering, what is the importance of maps, do you think, in role-playing games?
Well, I think that a map is, first off, I think that they're just fun to look at.
Yeah.
I think, who doesn't love to open up a fantasy novel or an RPG book and just look at the map and kind of marvel at what's here. And
Mm,
so I think it gets your mind going.
yeah.
I think it sparks your curiosity to want to know more, to want to explore these places.
Yeah.
And so it can be inspirational in that way. It's obviously kind of a practical, excuse me, a practical tool as well.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, I mean, I think so. There's that just very practical aid to the game
Hmm.
that it can be as well. Um, but mainly, I think that there is story implied. A map implies story. How did
Yeah.
this come to be? Why did they name it this? And
Yeah.
these mountains look interesting. What's going on there?
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, I think there's so much you could say, and so many people have said it more eloquently than I can, but there's something very magical about a map, and
It
there's
is.
no
Yeah.
denying it.
I totally agree. Yeah. So, what are some maps? Yeah, you were telling me that you liked reading the D&D novels and those kind of
Yeah.
things. I suppose they have maps in them. What would be a map that really inspired you as a youngster?
Hmm. So the map to Narnia was a
Uh huh.
big one.
Yeah.
Yeah, just and that map is, I like, one of the reasons I still love that map is
Uh-huh.
because they label, the map serves the story in that
Right.
case.
Yeah.
This is not a map of, at least I don't see it as like, kind of a map that someone in world was sitting there, before the Pevensies ever showed up,
Uh-huh.
um, drawing this kind of like, you know, here's a map for the kings of our age or anything like that. Like,
No.
it's got the lamp post on there. It's got these places that are significant to the story.
Yeah.
And I just love that kind of illustrative nature of it. That's just like, yeah, it's not very, it's not like you would see in a geography book. And I kind of
Yeah.
favor that style of map in some
Uh-huh.
ways. I wish I was better at drawing sometimes in order to really do that. But obviously the Lord of the Rings,
Yeah.
as well. I mean, that one. So those were my entries into fantasy. A
Uh-huh.
lot of the books, some of my favorite books, don't have maps in the book.
Oh.
There was a series called the Albion Trilogy by Stephen Lawhead, one of my favorite series, and I don't think there's a map in the book.
Oh.
A lot of the D&D ones don't have maps, I think. Actually, I'm wrong about that. Never mind. Okay, I think most of them do. The
Oh, yeah.
what's the series? I'm drawing a blank on the series where
That's
Drizzt
okay.
Do'Urden first appeared.
Ah.
Um, Streams of Silver, The Halfling's Gem, and Icewind Dale. The Icewind Dale trilogy.
Ah.
There
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
go.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the map of the Icewind Dale in there, I certainly spent a lot of time looking at that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so those are a few.
Yeah. And you specialize in fantasy maps, right?
Yeah.
So what about sci-fi maps? Because when I look around, if when I'm preparing to run a game or something, and I need a map of something for a
Mhm.
fantasy game, there's loads out there. And then I want to run a cyberpunk game, and it's like, oh, I quickly draw blanks. What about sci-fi maps? Do you like making them or?
So I really haven't made any that I would consider sci-fi, although
No.
some of my clients might, they might have, they kind of know what they're getting into with me, that it's going to
Mm.
be kind of an old world style, Lord of the Rings-esque style map when they come to me.
Yeah.
But that's not to say that perhaps there was some sci-fi in these worlds that I didn't know about when I was
Oh,
mapping
yeah.
them.
Yeah.
It's never the case that I know of, but hey, who knows? And
Mhm.
I think I do think when we're talking about sci-fi, it almost seems appropriate to me to do a map that is more uh, modern,
Uh-huh.
almost like a map you would see in a National Geographic today. Of
Yeah.
just um, yeah, you're not going to have the same kind of old world style. I
Yeah. Yeah.
also, so that's, if it's of a planet.
Mhm.
The Numenera map is one that is rendered very, kind of 3D-esque,
Yeah.
um, photorealistic almost style. That's, I guess sci-fi or science fantasy anyway. And then space maps, to me, they're cool,
Yeah.
but they don't get me going at
No.
all.
No.
Like when I see one, I'm just like, I have no desire to make one of those. And
No.
it's just the way it is. I love
Yeah.
sci-fi, but it
Yeah.
doesn't have the same magical attachment to maps to me.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I see what you mean. And the thing with space maps also is that they're kind of useless because space isn't two-dimensional. Um,
Exactly.
and yeah, because I've been looking at maps of the Expanse because I'm about to start running a game of the Expanse RPG,
Hmm.
and so those maps are very complicated because they show the routes of planets and then the way that they orbit around the sun, etc. And
Hmm.
wow, that it makes things
Yep.
very complicated. Yeah,
Yeah, totally.
yeah. What I enjoy about fantasy maps is, I think, kind of what you described when you talk about the Narnia map, is this feeling that somebody in that world knows where things are relative to each other, and then drew a map, and then to remind themselves, oh yeah, this is where this is. I'll draw a little thing there, and oh, this is the sea that scares me. I'll put a monster in it, that kind of thing. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah,
Yeah, they're telling a story themselves as they create that map. In the case
yeah,
of that map, I have to imagine it was, someone sitting down after the kids had left,
uh-huh.
and was trying to, mark the story of
Yeah,
their arrival and what happened.
yeah, yeah.
They're
It's a kind
marking
of
the landmarks of the story. They're not
yeah,
marking the biggest natural landmarks, the
yeah,
landmarks of the story.
yeah. So it's kind of like a diagram
Yeah.
of the story almost. Yeah, that's
Yeah. Uh-huh.
cool. That's a nice idea. Because when you look at maps that are provided in, for instance, in D&D campaign settings, very often they're just full of hooks. Um,
Yes.
I remember back in the AD&D days, I was playing in a world called Mystara, and they had several box sets out there of different regions. And you would look at the maps; there were all these hex grid maps, and
Hmm.
one in every 10 hexes had something in it that you're like, ooh,
Yeah.
I want to go there. Yeah,
Yep.
definitely.
It's
Yeah.
funny you mentioned Mystara. The first D&D novel I ever read was, I think, The Tainted Sword, and
Oh,
I didn't know it at the time, and I didn't find out till like a couple of years later. I was like, I can't tell where the setting of this book is, and I think I posted online a question, and someone said, "Oh yeah,
yeah.
that's Mystara." It's like, "Oh, cool. I never
Oh,
knew."
oh
So
wow. Yeah.
yeah.
It's a great setting. There's a lot of
Hmm.
fun to play in. Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. And so you create a lot of maps, and I guess you use them in your own games. And so do you play mostly online with people, or do you play more around the table?
I play more around the table. Yep. So
Uh-huh.
I have a hypothetically monthly gaming group.
Yeah.
We haven't gotten together in a long time, and it's kind of fallen apart.
Oh,
All groups kind of reach that point.
yeah.
Not all groups, but a
No.
lot of groups kind of reach that point where it's like, okay, two of my four are out. I have
Yeah.
one replacement. I can't get some of them to reply to my messages, so
Yeah.
this might be the beginning of a new group soon.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, but no, I also have kids, so that
Yeah.
makes it easy to run a game on a whim, which I enjoy.
Yeah. So you
Hopefully
play
they do.
yeah. So you play D&D with your kids, yeah?
I do. Yep.
Oh, and what
Hmm.
ages are they?
So they are um 10, 8, and 5.
Oh, wow.
And my 10 and 8-year-old will play with me.
Uh-huh.
I have played No Thank You Evil
Yeah.
with all 3 of them, and
Yeah.
that's fun.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of D&D, usually it's just my oldest, my 10-year-old, but sometimes my 8-year-old has the patience to sit down for an hour.
Yeah.
And it is like an hour. That's kind of the max. After
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
we're like, okay, guys, we got to stop.
Yeah, yeah. Just a quick adventure. Yeah. Oh,
Exactly.
that sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, that's a
It,
great way to connect to your kids. And
yeah.
so when you use maps in your games, like how do you utilize them? Because I often, you get these cool maps with a game, and then you think, okay, when and how do I actually use them?
So, I mean, there's so many different ways that they can be used. So,
Hmm.
we have the D&D Essentials kit, and got that over the summer. And that one's got a hex map that's very practical. It's just, there are 3 different jobs on the job board. One of them's here, one of them's here, one of them's here, and you can pull out the map. And I
Yeah,
think that's so cool that
yeah,
you can just say, well, I think, my son can say, Dad, I want to go right there. That
yeah,
one sounds cool. And you
yeah.
can point to it on the map and go
Right.
there.
Yeah.
And then and certainly I do similar things with my own maps that I've made of my world for my players in my
Mhm.
home group, where it's, well, to, right now, he's asking you to go here, but there's also this thing over here, and I can point to it on a map,
Yeah.
and they can decide where they want to go and see it visually on a map. That can
Yeah.
kind of help immersion.
Yeah.
I think it's an aid to immersion a lot.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then obviously also there's the smaller scale maps, the town maps,
Uh-huh.
which I do. I don't really do commissions for those. I just kind of I'll doodle my own for my table.
Yeah.
Dungeon maps as well. I love making dungeon maps.
Hmm. Yeah, and so dungeon maps, yeah, that's been a real fascination of mine for a long, long time. How to create them, and I used to have this big folder full of this tiny graph paper. I think it was like 10 millimeter boxes or something like that, and I would just keep drawing and drawing and drawing, kind of random dungeons. So what's your approach to creating a good dungeon for a game?
So, I mean, I often use references from real world stuff. So if I'm drawing a mind map, I will go look at mines and
Hmm.
try to find some mine layouts.
Yeah.
Um, I will, yeah. So I usually use that as a starting point for inspiration, but I'm also not afraid to deviate into something that's maybe not very realistic, but
Uh-huh.
serves the gameplay. I think that's huge,
Yeah.
is that you have to find that balance of realism, but
Hmm.
also serving the gameplay and practicality at the table in terms of like, well, you
Yeah.
know, I don't know, like a long straight pathway for um quarter mile. Don't make
Yeah.
that on your map.
No.
Just write that in
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then jump us to the next thing. And there
Uh-huh.
might be encounters along the way,
Yeah.
but you don't have to draw that in.
Yeah.
So I think I don't have a really well thought out approach. Sometimes I do just pick up my pen, see
Mhm.
where it wanders. If I'm doing caves, it'll wander in a jagged fashion. If I'm doing a bandit's lair underneath the tavern,
Uh-huh.
then it'll be straight lines, but I'm still kind of doodling and just letting my pen go.
Yeah. And do you ever take game mechanics into consideration when you create your maps? Like the distance people can walk in around, that kind of thing?
Definitely, yeah. And sometimes I'll draw a map and then realize afterwards, like,
Mhm.
wow, this is just way too cramped.
Yeah. Yeah.
Really, if I've got a party of 5,
Hmm.
like, no, this is just not going to work very well. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
need to okay, now each square is 10 feet. There we go.
Ah. Oh,
On the one that I've drawn. And
that's a good trick. Yeah.
yeah. So, definitely I think you have to keep in that, yeah, the game mechanics, the practicality, the I realized, oh, I don't really have any traps on this map. And so, well,
Huh.
let's throw in a couple traps.
Yeah.
I don't really have a social encounter. So yeah, where would a social encounter fit? Not
Yeah.
that you always need one, but
Mm.
sometimes I like to, add a little variety.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. Yeah. It's always good to when players expect mostly to be defeating traps and monsters, that suddenly, oh, now here's this person. or ghost or whatever it is that we need to talk to. Yeah.
Right. I was also really inspired for dungeon maps by Hanker Inferno over at Runehammer, who, when I was doing a hangout with him one time, we were drawing, it was on an episode of The Mappening, which is this monthly series I used to do.
Right.
And he started, we were drawing like an encounter map and a town map and just kind of doing some, some prep for a game. Essentially is kind of what it came down to. And he was drawing these buildings, and he was saying, like, this room will be the dex room, this room will be the strength room, and actually thinking of mechanics that way, where like making different challenges in each. But he was trying to make one for each ability score even. And so I thought that was or each ability. So I thought that was kind of a cool concept too. You can really get creative with mechanics.
So they inspire you to create something new, something you hadn't thought of. That's a good idea, because I know that Hanker Infernal, he talks a lot about room design on his YouTube channel, and about the underlying ideas. And he says that he's not a big fan of what does he call it? I forgot the term now. There's something like random. Well, I don't know the exact term. He has a really good word for it, but it had these random shapes that I used to draw. He's like, nah, make the shape kind of work for the game.
Making it believable, making it having it make sense in that spot. And then also, taking into consideration gameplay. You're not just an artist, you're a game designer.
Yeah, exactly. Because it can look really cool, and then the players get frustrated that they can't go anywhere, or that it's too small or too big. Because that's something that I come across now that I'm running a game of Dungeons and Dragons for my friends on a, well, kind of like you, a semi-regular basis, and adult life and all that. But I find as they go up in level, the monsters get bigger, and also their radius of action becomes bigger. They're able to fly, etc. So my maps get bigger and bigger. Have you ever come across that you think, oh, this map, I would need to make it so big it doesn't actually fit on the table, that kind of thing?
And there are many times where I'm drawing dungeons on maybe 8 pieces of gaming paper that I have to switch between at the table. So no, it's definitely and other times I'll say, I'm going to do a dungeon. We're doing a Bandit Slayer this time, and I am going to make it fit on this Chessex battle map, all of it. And I'm going to pre-draw it. And then in those cases, I usually cover up with pieces of construction paper the parts they haven't explored yet.
Kind of the fog of war idea.
Exactly. So definitely can go both ways. But I recently ran Sunless Citadel, and that's like, it's a throwback to really big dungeons. It's all relative. Some would say, look at that. 20 years ago, you might look at that map 30 years ago and say, it's not a very big dungeon. But nowadays, by today's standards, it's like, man, this is a pretty big dungeon.
Yeah. And I find when I use a very large dungeon and we run out of time, it's tricky to I tend to take a photograph of where the minis were, etc. But
and for me, having one that I've sketched out on graph paper, like you said, behind the screen, makes that easier, because I can annotate that. Marking where they were. But it can be, there's a lot of those practicalities at the table that and it seems like you come across new ones almost every game, where it's like, oh, I didn't think this through. Let's see.
Definitely. And so when you use your maps, you have some kind of grid that fits minis or something, or?
I do. So I either I'm often using 3D terrain. So I'm a big fan. I'm a patron of Black Magic Craft. And he's a friend of mine, and I really have gotten into crafting some 3D stuff too, and I usually try to make 1-inch grids on that. But I will, inspired by Index Card RPG, sometimes I will just do, you can move this far.
Yeah.
on one turn.
Yeah.
And if the viewers or the listeners can't see, I'm just holding my thumb and my pinky as far apart as I can.
Yeah. Yeah.
And in the book, they call it banana. You can move
Yeah.
one banana. So, but when I
Yeah.
played with Hanker and he was just doing this, I was like, that
Yeah.
works pretty well too.
Yeah.
So no, I don't think you need grids. And
No.
sometimes I will play theater of the mind.
Hmm.
And sometimes I prefer that for, definitely for certain things where it just allows you to be more freeform, improvisational,
Yeah.
quick in
Mm-hmm.
terms of setup and making progress through the story
Yeah.
when you're not fussing around with maps. And then I have had times where my players actually ask me, they say, I'm really having trouble picturing this, Nate. Can you like draw it out? And I'm like, okay, yeah. And then I grab
Yeah.
out, the Chessex mat and my marker and
Oh
go
yeah.
nuts.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good idea. I think that combination, because in my current game, they're in this giant underground dwarven city that has been decimated like 9,000 years ago,
Hmm.
and so they have a map of the region that they need to explore, which is a roughly sketched kind of map that some dwarf made. And it's a very, very small scale. And they keep asking me, so what is the exact scale? How many feet is it from here to here? I'm like, it's
Yeah.
yeah.
I
So
get frustrated by that sometimes too. And it's like, I
yeah,
understand why you want to know. And I'm just like,
yeah,
I didn't think it through. And
yeah,
let me get back to you next time.
yeah. Or, in general, I'm like, yeah, that's not really the point. It's more about, it gives you an idea roughly where you are. So we have something to
Right.
talk about. And then I try to do more of it with the theater of the mind techniques.
Mm-hmm.
And then when something, when the proverbial excrement hits the fan, then I'll put out a gridded map and say, okay, well, let's draw this little region out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. No, I think it's good to have a mix and just be flexible. And even, Jeremy from Black Magic Craft is real big on that idea too, that like,
Mm.
don't try to craft everything. Like
Yeah.
have your set pieces
Uh-huh.
crafted, but
Yeah.
don't be afraid just to bust out a battle map and a marker or do theater of the mind too once in a while.
Yeah. 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 It also depends, I think, where you game. If it's at your house, sure, you can have tons of stuff, but I cycle to my games. So
Yeah.
I'm
You're
very,
a traveling game master.
yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. We never really play here because we have an 11-month-old who, yeah, I think would
Yeah.
wake up from the noise of our game.
Yes.
Yeah.
The laughter and mirth.
Yes, absolutely. And the throwing of dice and the
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. So let's say you're going to start up a new game. You talk on your channel quite a bit about advice on how to get started with games. How do you get ready for the first few sessions of a new game? What's your approach?
Yeah. So I don't have an approach that I'm super happy with. I think
Mm.
next time I'm really going to try to stick to the lazy dungeon master method,
Hmm.
Sly Flourish.
Okay.
I really like his books. Not recently, but I now have the Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master, the updated edition, and I really want to try to get better, specifically at the campaign planning aspect. I feel really comfortable with session prep.
Yeah.
I get it's for me thinking like a game designer is big. So yeah, just thinking about, what will they be spending their time doing? And it's hard to predict all the time, but
Yeah.
trying to get a variety of different things so that, I generally try to have at least one combat every session.
Yeah.
And it might just be a tavern brawl. It
Oh
might
yeah.
be, a scuffle in the alley,
Yeah.
whatever, but something.
Mhm.
My players like that.
Yeah.
My kids certainly like almost only combat. So,
Yeah.
yeah, but thinking, and then yeah, the social encounters. Try to come up with a couple NPCs, interesting NPCs, usually
Mhm.
just one or two. And then there's certainly a background cast, but having one or two that I really flesh out and think about their story,
Yeah.
their motivation, their personality of voice.
Mhm.
And then I am also usually getting ready with maps. So yeah, if they're in a town, I will sketch out a town map.
Yeah.
If they're having my world map ready to show them you're here,
Mhm.
things like that. And but yeah, I think, and then with characters, I think a huge part of your start to a campaign should be based around the characters.
Yeah.
So if you're planning out a ton before your players have even rolled up characters, to me, that's a little problematic. I've been there, I've done that. And it's like, then you're trying to shoehorn in their backstories and all this into the story you already have in mind, when it's much easier to be inspired by their characters and the character backstories. So, I think that makes a, kind of takes the pressure off for a session one, that you can just kind of like, hey, we're just going to have a fun little dungeon crawl, and the campaign I'll start planning once I really see your characters and how it interacts. And, I've got some ideas, but or do a session 0 where you're just rolling up characters and talking about what they want from a game and what you want from a game.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, because I think the mistake I made with my current campaign is that we had a session 0 about what kind of game would you like, etc. And then I came up with kind of the main ideas of the campaign. Where is it going to go, etc. And then they made the characters. So we did kind of half. and then, like you say, then you're as a game master, you're spending time trying to think, okay, how do I fit this particular character into the thing I already have, which is can be difficult. Yeah, definitely. And then, so do you mostly play Dungeons and Dragons, or do you also play other games?
I mostly play D&D 5th edition, but definitely I make a goal of trying a couple new RPGs every year. So I've played a lot. Any
favorites?
Oh man, I love Tales from the Loop. Which is kind of an 80s, a little bit Stranger Things-esque. Goonies, and all that stuff. Your kids in the 80s, but it's an alternate history 80s.
That's cool. And that's from Free League, right?
Free League, and I'm a big fan of their books. I haven't played Forbidden Lands, but I own that too, and I really want to try it. Let's see what else. I've enjoyed the Fantasy Flight Star Wars games, playing those from time to time. I've enjoyed what's it called? Fiasco. Oh man, that was I've only played it once, and then I bought the book, and I really want to play that one again. I was just looking at the book the other day. Pathfinder. I have books of both editions. I like a wide variety of games. I should look at my shelf.
Oh wow. Yeah.
Let's see. I have Numenera. I've only played the beginner session. I really there's a few back there.
Wow. I kind of have a similar thing that I want to try out different games, and I have them here on the shelf. Where you can't see them, but because I have this backdrop here, but and then finding the time to play them properly, that's a thing.
And there are books that I buy that I realize I'll probably never play this, but I'm still okay with owning the book because I like RPG books.
Definitely. Just to leaf through them and get some ideas from them. Yeah,
exactly. Yep.
And I agree with you that the books from Free League, they tend to be very interesting and also very nice looking, which helps. Yeah, definitely.
It's huge. Yep.
Yeah.
That's a huge part of the books for me is the art, the layout, the aesthetics, because when I was reading through those the Forbidden Lands books, I was just constantly oohing and awing, just like and just thinking to myself, hopefully I'll play this someday, but man, these books.
They're beautiful. I'm going to be talking to somebody from Free League pretty soon as well for the podcast.
They're good people. They I went to Gen Con last year, and they just swept the ENnie awards, as they often do. And it's just like so I saw one of them at a restaurant afterwards, and talked for a bit and congratulated him. So
nice, lovely. And so one of the things you told me before we started the interview is that you also teach a role-playing game class, right? At the school where you work. That's cool.
So I've done it a few times. I did not do it this year, but last year, the year before, I think I've done it 3 or 4 times. So we have a January term at my school, and this is new as of, I don't know, it's been less than 10 years that we've been doing this.
Right.
And it's amazing. I absolutely love it because it's a 2-week time period after we come back from our Christmas break, where we are where students take 2 half-day classes in general.
Yeah.
That's kind of the norm. There are a couple full-day classes, but 2 half-day classes for those 2 weeks. So we'll have 10 class periods in general, and they're 3 hours each. So I'm teaching, 5 days one week, 3 hours, and 5 days another week, 3 hours, and that's just, it's perfect for an RPG class. Because, and we're encouraged to kind of propose things that connect to our hobbies or interests, and things that we think kids would enjoy. Take a break from the norm. There are some academic classes, but most of them are trying to attract students and are fun. So we do some writing in that class, and we do students do presentations and things like that. But we also spend a lot of time playing role-playing games. Mainly D&D 5e. So I do history lessons. Each day I'll do like a little 20 to 30 minute lecture on like an era of history in role-playing games. And then kids, we have a game of the day presentation. So at the beginning of the class, I have them, I have a list of like 10 different game systems, and I let them choose others as well. And then we kind of divide up, and they have a partner, and they have to present on that game that day, talk to us about the mechanics, the world, who designed it, how did it come to be.
That's really cool.
And so that's really cool too. So we can learn about different systems, and sometimes that inspires them to want to try that system. And sometimes it's like, well, we do have some game time where I'm going to encourage you to try a new game. So, if you want one of these, I can buy it on Drive Through RPG right now and print it out, and you can prep for tomorrow if you want to run it.
Oh, wow.
So we've had some of that too. I had that with not Fiasco. What's the Dread? There we go. Which is a Jenga tower horror RPG.
What age are these students?
They're 15, or I should say 14 to 18.
Oh, right. Okay.
So they're high school. 14 to 18 is what that is in the US.
Okay.
And so it's a lot of fun. We do some world building exercises. I make them like, write out 1-page prep for a session and like submit it, and I give them feedback on it.
Oh, wow.
And,
and so are these kids who will play role-playing games at home with their friends as well? Or is it some are just curious, what is all this? Or
some are definitely just curious. I'd say it's kind of half and half. I would say probably a quarter to a third of my class is like hardcore into RPGs. And the rest, maybe another third or so have played some, like, or maybe their brother plays and they played with their brother once, or something like that. And then the other third usually are totally new to it. Some of usually 2 of them, 3 of them have no idea what a role-playing game is.
They just joined because their friend joined, kind of thing,
right? Or it's like, hey, it's games, that can't be bad.
Exactly.
Sounds better than reading books. Oh, but you do have to read books.
Exactly. You end up reading books. Oh, wow. That's wonderful. So you're leaving behind like generations of children basically who have come in touch with all kinds of different role-playing games because of those classes, and then they spread the word in their social circles.
No, it's been really cool to see that some kids I've had kids tell me this class changed their life. I think you can say that of a lot of classes, but that's amazing to hear that this class, because it introduced them to the role-playing games, changed their life.
Because they got new friends, or maybe we're able to work through some things through a role-playing game, etc.
I think confidence and leadership are huge, and just social interaction. But specifically, one student told me that it just gave me just confidence in life. That I didn't have before. Running games has just given me that. So
that's amazing. And I think that's a great segue into what is my usual final question, which is who is your personal hero? Because I'm sure that some of these kids see you as their RPG hero, but who is your personal hero when it comes to role-playing games? Who is something you would look up to? And
oh man, that's a tough one, because there are so many, and I started making YouTube videos as a part of the YouTube RPG Brigade. It was this Facebook group, and we all just were like conversing via video kind of. And so a lot of those people are still people who, you know, we all just kind of suck inspiration from one another. And it's been, really over the years, cool to see some of them grow and some of them disappear. But I think when I have questions about running a game, when I have a need for some inspiration, I usually go to my friends. So Matt Click from A Fistful of Dice is, I mean, some of his videos were absolutely instrumental for me. And then he was my dungeon master. And so he was, you know, modeling this for me in, I think, such an effective way. I just see him as like one of the dungeon masters I respect most. And then, you know, my friend Barker and Tim and James, these guys are all a part of Absolute Tabletop. They're some of my heroes. And, you know, when they formed Absolute Tabletop too, that was inspirational for me. That's just, you know, their independent RPG publishing company. And they do amazing work, and they just have gone for it. You know, they're just decided, we want to write RPG books. And
for a living. That's amazing. Okay, that's a great answer. So it's not one, but several. Fair enough. I'll let you do it. I find when I ask this question to people, they tend to say, well, there's many people, and it's kind of you want to mention a bunch of them because it's, you know, it's nice to be able to shout out to people, hey, you know, you're doing great things, and also it can feel a bit limiting to say, well, only this person. Totally.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, Matt was one of my first dungeon masters. So if I had to pick one, it'd be him. Like, and we all know it in the Provokers group that like Matt was just an amazing DM. And he's the one who brought us together. So you know, he invited us to a one shot, and you know, 5 years later, these are some of my best friends. So.
And that's the cool thing I find that happens around a good gaming table, is that you don't just play the game, you forge real friendships. All right, wonderful. And I think that's a really nice positive note to finish the interview on. So I would like to thank you very much for this wonderful interview at over here, relax the clock, and over there, kind of, whoa, that's early o'clock.
No, it was my pleasure, Klaus. I really appreciate you inviting me, and I'm honored, and it was fun talking to you.
Great. Well, thank you very much. So once again, what a wonderful guest. These RPG heroes are really beginning to live up to their names. So what are my main takeaways from this interview? Well, one is that maps are a tool for immersion. I think that's a wonderful way to put it. Maps really help to kind of draw you into this imaginary world that we use for our role-playing games. And they really awaken all kinds of fantasy in your brain. Maps also help to inspire stories and adventures, like I've also said in the beginning of the episode. And maps draw you into the narrative, so you can point at, look, I'm here now, I want to go there, but there's this mountain in the way, and this forest, and it's called the Dark Forest, and why, etc. You can look at little things on the map and think, what is that, and why is it there, and I want to go there and have some sort of adventure. Another interesting thing that Nate mentioned was to be flexible in your approach to maps. You can mix your styles of play as they become relevant. You know, you can use some pre-made fancy maps. Sometimes you can use theater of the mind or a quick sketch on a dry erase map, etc. It all works just fine when you mix and match. You don't always have to go for this fancy high-resolution stuff. I have to say, so far, the RPG heroes that my guests mention tend to be people who share the passion, share the knowledge, and introduce people to the amazing hobby of role-playing games. So if you want to be an RPG hero yourself, well, I think that's the recipe right there. Well, that's it for episode 6. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed recording. If you did, please consider leaving a 5-star review on iTunes. It really helps to get the podcast get heard. Want to keep up with the latest news about my podcast? Well, hop on over to my Facebook page on facebook.com/RPG Heroes Podcast, or find me on Twitter as @RPGHeroes1. Check out the full show notes with the links at rpgheroes.buzzsprout.com. And of course, if you want to support the show, like I said at the start, please join other supporters on my Discord channel by supporting me on Patreon at patreon.com/rpgheroes. 2 weeks from now, I'll be delving into post-apocalyptic gaming with the help of the CEO of Swedish RPG firm Free League, Thomas Herenstam. Until next time, stay heroic.